Welcome to the Mind Chimp podcast. Good. Hey Nick, welcome to the Mind Chimp podcast. How are we doing?
Yeah, good. I'm just munching some peanuts. Actually, I find it keeps me going through the day. So
There's nothing wrong with that.
That's what you're hearing. It's not a problem on the line. How are you?
I'm good. I'm great. I can't complain. I suppose the sun is shining, so I can't really. I've got nothing to really complain about. But you know, I'm sure I could find something to overthink and overanalyze every single thing in my life.
It's a strength and a weakness, isn't it? All strengths are weaknesses, but that overthinking things. I mean, it does give you the ability to, really get to the bottom of things. But on the other hand, it makes it harder just to enjoy it. When the sun is shining, there's something else rattling around in your head. Or at least that's what I find.
Yeah, massively. I've just come back from Centre Parks. Never been before. It was a family do where everyone kind of got together for a week. And obviously at the moment I'm job hunting at the moment, but obviously I need my phone for people to kind of call me. And one of the things which Centre Parks does is it cuts you off from the outside world.
Yeah.
So my mobile phone was pretty much non-existent. And while it was a bit of a curse in the situation, it was actually just really good to kind of just leave my phone at home in the drawer. It was ace, and just taking nature.
That's a really interesting thing, because I saw some research with so-called millennials, whether or not they exist, is a separate question, but kind of young people basically who are typically spending a lot of time, we know, on their phone. They may check their phone like 70 times a day or something, and they took them away for them from a day, and they experienced that as a really kind of negative experience. And the comment that stuck in my mind was somebody was asked why, and they said, well, they just couldn't stand being alone with their own thoughts. And I really worry about that, the sort of sense that people aren't with themselves anymore. They're constantly fallen into something else, like fallen into somebody else's life in Facebook, or fallen into Instagram, what people are posting and, what they're doing. And I think that's a vanishing part of our lives, that ability to just kind of be alone. Even on trains. I mean, very few people are just sort of staring out the window. They're checking something or listening to something, and it's almost like an escape from who we are. So it got a bit philosophical rather quickly.
No, philosophical is good. I think, there is an art to being alone. I think it's it's a kind of embracing that. For me, being on my own is a good thing. But for the first 5-10 minutes, I'm like, oh, I should be doing something. But that's just because of my behaviour of me being so used to being on my mobile device. So, I've got some spare time, I must be doing something. And I just think, you're right. I mean, the only time I actually ever really get to be on my own and just let my mind wander and come up with wacky, weird ideas or whatever, tends to be in the bath. Because my phone, I don't really want to get my phone damaged, so I don't really do any scrolling or anything on my phone like that. Every now and again I might take a book in there, but realistically the chances are my pages are going to get wet, so I just tend to just be in the moment in the bath, which is a bit of an insight into my day-to-day life. But I guess if we had to say to you, Nick, what would be your log line? So a summary of who you are, and a log line being something over the top and a bit like a sentence which would sell a movie. What would your log line be?
Yeah, I saw that in your instructions. I thought it was a really good thing. And it struck me that a lot of people don't have a log line. And then I realised I have a log line because I put it on LinkedIn. That is my log line, and my log line is the bloke who thinks he's discovered how people learn, but will probably be dead before anybody else thinks so. And that is pretty much the story of my life, I think, summed up in a single line.
Okay, so let's touch upon that. Why not? So the bloke who discovered how people learn, but you feel like by the time you die, people will still be struggling with it. What is that? What is
that? Well, I started out as a psychology lecturer, and was sort of teaching lots of things from learning theory, and then I moved into business. Where I had a chance to kind of put it into practice. So I became a developer, and I did kind of Flash development, and we had a development team. And I was busy putting all this instructional design theory and everything and learning theory into practice and thinking, oh, this is wonderful, and we're changing the world, and isn't what we're doing so much better than what everybody else is doing? And then eventually had an opportunity to put it to test. And we created this little experiment where you had the same information. It was about the solar system, and it was in 5 different formats, all the way up from really, really dull, boo-hiss text, all the way through up to all singing, all dancing, interactive e-learning, kind of stuff that we were paying a lot for and creating. And anyway, had 5 different groups of students. We told them, look, you're going to have 30 minutes with this stuff, and then you're going to be tested at the end, find out how much you remember. And of course, this was about 20, 25 something years ago. Everything in instructional design would tell you that, the more instructionally designed stuff was better somehow. But it wasn't. When we did the test, people actually learned slightly more from the text. And it was a real kind of earthquake in my career, early on in my career. And I realized it was all just mumbo jumbo. That, it didn't, we hadn't even scratched the surface of how people really learn. And so I then went on this kind of epic adventure to try and discover how people really learn, which resulted in something called the effective context model, which I've been working with for about 10 years or something now. But the really sobering thing then was there was a point at which I really did realize that, this is how people learn. This describes everything that I'm seeing and I know and all of the research that I've read. And I thought, wow, that's it. It's kind of like, wow, I've done it. But then what I realized subsequently was that progress is kind of like 1% discovery and 99% marketing. And I found this horrifying because it was kind of like, well, I wasn't really interested in marketing or celebrity or popularizing stuff. I just wanted to be able to say, look, there's the answer, off you go. And so the last few years have been this grinding realization that I have to be much more kind of out there if I want to kind of change things. Which I never expected to have to do, really. I was just interested in the answers. So that's a rather long explanation of that sentence, but that's
that's a good explanation. I guess you touched upon, where you started off as a lecturer. So maybe let's just touch upon, I know who you are, Nick, and maybe for the people who don't know who you are, maybe give us a bit of a brief bio of kind of where you've come from to where you are now, if you could.
Sure. So I was born in Woking. I grew up in Reading. I went to Quaker school, actually, in Reading. So we spent a lot of time in sitting in silence. And probably was quite an introverted kind of child, interested in all kinds of arcane sort of stuff. Went to university to study philosophy and psychology, studied in the UK and the US. Didn't really know what I was going to do with philosophy and psychology, but I was passionate about it. Travelled around quite a bit. Got a master's in philosophy, and then ended up as a psychology lecturer. That was my first job. And I did that for about 5 years, and I wrote a couple of textbooks, study guides, in fact, and then was lured away by the appeal of doubling my salary for a kind of startup where I got to drive around in an Audi. I felt important and started inventing all kinds of new things using technology, and eventually got a job at Siemens Communications, where I think they thought I was going to be a librarian. There were all these CDs, and I think they were going to pay me lots of money to kind of sit with a secretary at a desk and hand out these CDs to people who would go off and do some learning and then come back with the CDs later. And I didn't want to do that at all. So I learned Flash, and I had a Flash team, and we started doing weird and wonderful things. Then I went to the BBC for 5 years, which was really interesting, where I learned that you should put the audience at the heart of everything that you do, even though the BBC doesn't ever do that. And then from there to BP, where I was for 5 years, met and worked with some great people. And then we moved across to PA Consulting, where I head up the Learning Innovation team. And I've done that for 2 years now.
Okay. So kind of a wide range of roles, I guess. And each one being quite unique, being kind of different from from the BBC right through to BP. What's my question here is kind of what are the key learnings or the themes what you might have picked up from, say, the BBC and took with you to BP, if any, or what themes have you seen where you've seen it done wrong and you thought there's no way on earth I'm taking that to my next role? You can rephrase that question however you like.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there have been a lot. I like to think I've changed. There have been a lot of learnings, I guess. One thing that stuck in my mind is when I joined the BBC early on, I was sitting in a taxi with somebody who'd been there and was just about to leave for been there for sort of 30 years. And this chap leant across towards me and he said, let me give you a bit of advice, Nick, about working at the BBC. He said, my one bit of advice would be, Nobody ever got fired for not making a decision. And it's just staggering advice, really, that the best way to get on in a business like that was just to not make any decisions. And I encountered that quite a lot in corporate life, is that people advance by just not doing things, and particularly by kind of not taking risks. And I think that was quite formative for me in a way, because there came a point where I realized that that wasn't really what success looked like for me. It was just kind of climbing some ladder by avoiding doing anything, out of the ordinary. In fact, quite the contrary. I wanted to do extraordinary things. I wanted to do things that, created a ruckus, as you say, a bit of a fuss, were different, were exploratory. And I don't think that's a great recipe for career success, but it's meant that I've done stuff that I'm proud of, and done stuff that was a horrible mistake and learned from. And when I look back, I find it quite easy to think of things that I was either kind of embarrassed by and were just really stupid, or things that I'm hugely proud of and were real breakthroughs in what we were doing.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I think it's really interesting. I think if you look at from where you are now to where you might be in 10 years, if you look back and you think, actually, I've not made any mistakes and I've done well, my argument would be, well, actually, how well have you done if you've not made any mistakes? Because potentially you've probably just done the same old, maybe adapted it and tweaked it a touch. But, I think I'm a firm believer of your biggest learnings is either a win or a learning. And I think, even your mistakes are kind of tend to be the best examples of that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think, at the risk of sounding philosophical, there's a kind of the biggest mistake of all is not to make mistakes. And it sounds a bit silly, but what I mean by that is that I really do see lots of people who just aren't aware of their mistakes. They are making mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes all the time, but people who go through lives never really being kind of stopped in their tracks and thinking, oh, that was really idiotic. Why did I do that? Or and I think that just means that they never really go anywhere, developmentally at least. They never advance because they're not aware of the mistakes. They're making mistakes, but they're not aware, and so they don't change.
So I guess before we even get into probably a touch deeper, when you was in school and your teacher would say, so Nick, what is it you want to be when you grow up? What was the answer you'd given when you was in school?
It changed. I think it does for most people. I think when I was really young, I wanted to be a zookeeper because I was reading a bunch of books. I forget the name of the author, but something My Family and Other Animals was the title I remember. Anyway, it all seemed really nice, kind of looking after animals. And then later on, I think when I was at the Quaker school, we had a visit from two Buddhist monks, and I was super impressed by these chaps. It was two male monks who seemed really thoughtful, and they had a really clarity of thinking on a number of questions that we put to them. And then for a while, I thought that's what I wanted to do. But the other thing I wanted to be was Doctor Who. I liked Doctor Who as a program when I was younger, and I thought the idea of kind of travelling backwards and forwards in time, that really appealed to me. So I think being Doctor Who was probably the thing.
Okay. Interesting fact. So I used to live next door to a Doctor Who. Yeah,
wow, which one?
Shacklton.
Oh, right, yeah.
So there you go. There's a bit of insight. So, okay. So what I thought we'd do is, what I want you to do, Nick, if you can, is I want you to pick out 4 numbers from 1 to 100 for me.
4 numbers from 1 to 100. 86.
Yep.
77.
Yep.
91.
Okay.
And 2.
Perfect. We will come back to them later on. So I'm going to fire out some words to you, and I want to see what's the first thing what comes to mind. Yeah. So try not to filter out the things what come to mind. Just go for it. So first one, learning and development.
It's not really a word, but just a feeling. It kind of makes me laugh, really. I think learning and development, and it makes me laugh because there's just such a kind of gap between, how those words are used and how they should be. So yeah, that's my kind of reaction.
Okay. Social media.
Fun. I think social media is a real lot of fun. People use conversations kind of that make it sound a little bit like use words like conversation, which make it sound a little bit dull, and social media conversation, this, that, the other. But above all else, I think it's quite a lot of fun.
Okay. Employee engagement. In fact, let's just rip that one up. Let's call it culture.
Culture. Yeah. Greg Urban. There's a country and western singer called Keith Urban. Every so often I get mixed up, which is why I hesitate. But Greg Urban's written some of the books that I really love about culture. And that also links me on to the other guy, Jared Diamond, not Jared Leto, who plays the Joker, but Jared Diamond. I'm terrible with names. But Jared Diamond, who's written books which really influenced me about culture. Like, was it Guns, Germs and Steel and The World Until Yesterday? When you read The World Until Yesterday, which is about culture in New Guinea, you realise that culture has been a certain way for millennia. And really what we think about as culture today or in our organisations is just a fleeting mistake in many cases. So, yeah, that's what comes to mind with you.
Okay, and the last one, Nick Shacklton Jones.
I don't know what to think about that. It's quite a long name, isn't it? But Nick Jones, I never use because it sounds like a made up name. So, you may know that I struggle. I've had problems with this when I'm a coffee addict, and when I go into Starbucks, I've learned that you can't give your name as Nick because if you do, it's such a common name that routinely other people pick up your coffee or you pick up somebody else's. So I use Romeo instead because it's a name that everybody uses, and I thought everybody knew how to spell, but apparently not. And then people were taking the mickey out of me for using Romeo, and I said, well, what name should I use? And they said Anakin. But I'm not sure that everybody knows the name Anakin either, so I'm open to suggestions as to.
Okay. So I tend to always go with Pedro.
Pedro, yeah, I think Pedro's quite good. Vote for Pedro.
Exactly that. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
I like that.
So if you was to give a book as a gift to, and I'm just picking up on the ideas of the books which you mentioned then, but if you was to give a book as a gift to 3 people, what book would you give them?
Good question. Do you mean the same book, 3 people, or 3 books?
Let's do the same book to 3 people.
Have to be Nietzsche, I think, Beyond Good and Evil.
Okay, so why that one?
I think because I study philosophy. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time with continental philosophers, and Nietzsche is so rich, so thought-provoking, so challenging and disruptive, and so lively in his writing style. He shows that almost everything can be done differently. You can think differently about things. You can talk differently. I mean, he's a German, but read his books, and he just writes in such a kind of comical style. He says things like, any day when you don't dance is a day wasted. You know, this from a philosopher that who are the opposite of that. So philosophers are people who don't dance, aren't they? You know, they're the big-brained people who you never see at a disco. Nietzsche says a day without dancing is a day wasted. He's just a brilliant person to read, I think.
Okay, cool, superb. So, if I was to say, kind of, you know, in your whole career where you've been and to where you are now, what's been your favourite? And sounds going to sound a bit strange. Your favourite negative, positive moment. So something what's happened to you, which in the moment looked like it was a bit of a negative, and it, you know, oh my God, this was a massive failure. But actually, the spiral out. Actually, looking back in, you realise it was a real positive moment for you.
Wow, that's a really good question. I'm not sure. I think there's some standard answers. I'm trying to think of anything deeper, but I think there were times where I don't know. Well, here's one that I haven't talked about much before. I think I began to get really I had a lot of experiences of standing up on stage and talking about stuff in the way that people do at conferences, and you get some PowerPoint slides and get some bullet points, and the next thing you know, you've got a 40-minute speech and questions at the end. And I just began to realize that was completely counter what I was trying to do, or what I was saying people should try and do. And it still is today. I'm sure you've noticed that as well. You go along to conferences where people are talking about how learning needs to change, and they're talking about it by standing up on stage with a PowerPoint deck with lots of bullet points, and you think it just doesn't make any sense. So hypocritical. So I did a rap, which I think is still knocking about somewhere online. There was a guy on TED called Reeves who does such a beautiful job of kind of beat poetry, actually it is, I think, really. And I thought that, that affected me, and that would be more like the kind of thing that I want to do. So I was invited to speak at BET, which is an educational technology show you probably know about, and I did a rap, and then I looked at it and I thought, well, I wasn't anywhere as good as I wanted to be. So in one sense it was negative, but I also learned that you could do something different, and I've continued to think about what we might do that's different.
Okay. So I guess this is kind of where things start to challenge the norm. It just even from probably a PowerPoint. So with these podcasts, I try to remain as impartial as possible. But one of the things which I can't remain impartial about is something like a presentation, a slide deck. So I've kind of, probably for the last 2 years, I've kind of set myself up to be able to present from one slide. So I won't ever use more than one slide. I just call it a one slide challenge for me. Because realistically, that's all you really need. And, the chances are is 3/4 of that slide is just saying your name and your title anyway.
Yeah.
Which is another argument, I guess, what the titles even mean anymore. But yeah, so, okay. So if, looking at kind of, you're always developing, and you're always picking up something new, picking up a new skill, a new technique or whatever. What would you say the top 3 resources you're using right now? And let's put a bit of a rule on this. So it can't be we'll exclude social media. So you can't use social media as a resource.
Right.
So what?
So you've asked a deeply technical question from my standpoint, because a resource, by definition, at least my definition, is not something that drives your learning forwards. A resource is something that responds to a desire to learn. So I know it sounds like an academic distinction, but in a sense, I can tell you the answer to what resource is. But really, the interesting question, I believe, is, what experiences, in the sense, are driving your learning forwards. In terms of resources, did you say I'm not allowed to say kind of social media and stuff like that? Yeah,
let's rule social media out, because it's too easy to say social media.
So it is, isn't it? Good question. So I think what's really driving my learning at the moment is our experiences. So maybe I'm not answering your question, but I don't believe that resources fundamentally drive learning. But I think their experiences are being thrown into challenges where you've got different environments, different problems to solve. That drives my learning. Another thing that drives my learning is reading old books. There's a guy called Nassim Taleb who basically says your best predictor of whether or not something's going to be around for a while is if it's been around for a while. And what I find with a lot of new books, and I read a lot of new books as well, is that they're quite often superficial and they're kind of passing. They're trendy. They're just something that's fashionable right now. Whereas if you actually read some of the older books, philosophers and thinkers, you discover things which the best ideas are there, to put it another way. The really interesting thoughts are there. So I really struggle when people ask me about things like what blogs or resources that you use, because anything in learning, I just find the only reason actually I read learning blogs is because they wind me up so much that I have to respond and write something. So if I really want to write, the best way for me to write a blog is to actually read some of the existing blogs on learning. And it just makes me so furious that I feel obliged to kind of respond and set the record straight, and then I write a blog.
Okay.
But that's a kind of negative use of those resources, I guess. But it's I mean, this is as honest an answer as I can give, I think.
I don't think it's a negative, because the thing what you put out will help shape the people who are following you and stuff like that. So let's just say it as a way of giving back. I think a lot of things are built out of frustration. I think I was reading recently about spandex. The lady who created spandex, and she was saying the reason why she created it was what had happened is, before this video come out, people would cut the bottom off so that you get this this streamlined approach, and it was only because of frustration, because of the thing rolling up constantly. She said, "Why is this not already here?" Yeah, it was just tracking her whole story of how high spandex was. It just come from frustration.
Yeah.
So I think you picked up on something really well. I think in our industry, people do not know the difference between a trend and a fad. For me, if someone says, "Well, what's the difference between a trend and a fad?" I'd say, "Well, denim is a trend. Originally workers used it for overalls, and over the length of time, it's remained here. The fad is whether you have rips in your jeans, or whether you turn up your jeans, or I think being able to kind of distinguish between a trend and a fad is really important, especially when where we are right now in what we do, kind of chatbots and this and that, and it's great to kind of constantly challenge and see what we can use. But I think we have to be really careful not to fall into that magpie syndrome of shiny.
Yeah, I think there's an even worse thing about trends is often they reflect ways in which the current convention defends itself. So they're essentially kind of defense mechanisms. So there's a trend, for example, away from LMSs, and a dawning realization that they're not only horrible kind of things that don't help learning, but in a lot of cases they actually actively prohibit learning or stop learning, effectively taking place. And the LMS industry obviously wants to continue. So the fad that's kind of spawned is things like microlearning, where basically it just allows the same old approach to continue to survive a little bit longer. So that it's even worse in the New Jeans example, because quite often the fads are an attempt to stop the trend. They're an attempt to turn back the clock, really, and continue to do things in the same way. And I think that's why they can be troubling.
I think it's really interesting, and it's going to be a question which I'm going to ask you somewhere down the line today anyway. But for me, the LMS industry is a bit like the CIPD, and it's a bit like the Weight Watchers, and it's a bit like this. They create this own little ecosystem which is self-fulfilling, because you look at, say CIPD, I bounce back and forth on whether I like them or whether I don't like them. But what I don't like is the kind of subscription model where you've got to subscribe every year, you've got to keep your stamp up to date and stuff like that. And it's a bit like how a Weight Watchers program works. You go, you join Weight Watchers, your teacher, here's some eating here, have these points or whatever it is. And then if a behavioural change hasn't happened, you leave Weight Watchers, and then in 6 weeks' time, you find yourself back at Weight Watchers because you put your weight back on. And I think with the LMS, it's the same thing. People, one of the frustrations which I keep saying I'm going to write a blog about, and I haven't done it just yet, is the industry. So right now, me job searching, and I kind of like to think of myself as being ahead or at the forefront of trying new things and doing things differently. But when you look at the industry right now, and you're looking at, okay, let's have a look what's available. They're still screaming out for e-learners, and I'm like, wow, you may, for the whole fact of you being ahead of it right now, you may as well just be behind, and that's kind of frustration which I felt.
I think the LMS industry, I'm somewhat hesitant to be critical, because I've been critical a lot of LMSs, and now it's become a bit like a piñata, and I just feel like everybody's putting the boot in, and that instinctively just makes me reluctant to pile in. And I think there's a couple of things to say about the LMS. But certainly, some organisations have kind of regulatory pressures, and they've just got to get people to tick a box, and frankly, to hell with it and get an LMS, and then you've got your completion records. I think that's a deeply cynical agenda. I mean, I can't imagine really any regulator being happy that an industry has changed just because a bunch of people have done an e-learning course. And so, that's one thing. I think the other thing is it's actually a pretty good event management system. Most LMSs are really good at kind of scheduling events, and I do think events can be really good. So if we just called it an event or compliance management system, that would be great. And then people could say, all right, and what are we going to do about our learning culture? And they could talk about a whole load of other systems like apps or knowledge sharing or whatever. But the problem is that they've oversold LMSs as a learning management system. And then whenever somebody starts to talk about learning, they say, well, we've got a learning management system, so it all has to be done there. And that actively prevents people making progress in terms of their learning agenda. And don't even get me started on the user experience. I think that the problem, though, with attacking the LMS is that many of the people who attack it can't tell you really coherently what would be better. And that is a problem, because ultimately I can't be critical of people who work in LMS businesses or LMS itself, because generally there is a kind of intellectual bankruptcy around how learning should work. So what lies at the heart of the LMS is this kind of idea of knowledge transfer, which is the idea that the learning industry is about kind of stuffing information into people's heads. And many of the people who are critical of the LMS still hold that model. So they're just as bad. So I think that, it's a bit more complicated, I think, is after many years of kind of being critical about LMSs. It's no good being critical about the LMS if you don't know what a better solution would look like. And that's sort of where I am today.
Actually, it's really interesting. I had a call with someone, I won't say the name, but it was yesterday. And we was talking about a very well-known, LMS, if you want to call it an LMS. It was Workday Learning. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. So I have a real love-hate with Workday Learning. I love Workday from a HR system, from an onboarding and kind of streamlining that. I love it. But Workday Learning right now is nowhere near where it needs to be. From a UX point of view, it's absolutely pointless. However, going off what you just mentioned there, it is a great event management system. You need to book on something, perfect. And I just think in this day and age where we've got various, you got your learning record stores, you got your X APIs, you got this, you got that. I just think, really, for me,
let me take XAPI. It's a really good example of how people suggest an alternative, which I don't believe fundamentally is any better. So people say, well, forget about, the LMS. It's all about XAPI. And I thought about this for a while. I thought, well, everyone's talking about XAPI. I'd see it at shows. Maybe I should go and have a look at it. And then I found that in practice, it means, you watch a 5-minute video and the little quiz pops up at the end and tests you on how much you've learned. Or, or some record of completion is stored every time you access some sort of asset. And I thought, that's awful, because that just shows that people's thinking hasn't moved on at all. And the example I give is in real life, I learn all the time. So I kind of drive to school. I listen to stuff on the radio. My daughter persuades me to listen to a kind of pop song. I read a bit of a book on the train. I have a look at Twitter. How on earth is XAPI going to actually track, whether or not I could sing that pop song, that I heard on the radio? It's just bizarre. And I mean, the idea is all, again, centered around this formal notion of learning, which is XAPI is an improvement because, the knowledge is now in smaller bits. But, basically we're still doing the same thing, which is we're tracking whether or not people know something they didn't before. And that's not how learning works. And so XAPI is an example of exactly that, which is if your mindset doesn't change, you'll continue to do horrible things with technology. And I know lots of people will disagree with me, but, that's become the battle, really. The more I look at the industry, the more I realise you cannot fix it unless you drill all the way down to the root of the problem, which is how people think about learning.
Yeah. Okay. Super. So, and I guess this is kind of one of the great things about the industry, what we're in, and because we're all adults within this industry. Well, most of us are adults within this industry. It gives us the adaptation to be able to go, actually, you know what? I was wrong there. I'm growing up to say I'm learning something new, and my opinion's changed. And it's interesting to see how many people don't apply that. I think for me, when I look out and I just go, okay, well, here's your opinion, what you had at the start, and here's all the new evidence to show that. Don't want to get me started on learning styles, but here's new evidence to kind of say, your opinion is wrong there, but yet we still stick with that one we don't apply any new evidence to kind of change your mind and help change your opinion and look at it a different way. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. So, if I was to say to you, Nick, explain to me what you do. Explain to a 3-year-old what it is you do. What would you say?
I sort of had to do this a few times, and I've not been entirely happy with my performance. And I think I know what I say to organisations, which is, we help organisations to modernise their approach to learning, or to innovate in the way that they create learning. But I think when I've tried to explain that to, like, my daughter who's 9, she just looks blankly at me, because I think it implies lots of things about organisations and learning and innovation and modernisation. So I'm not sure I've quite got there yet. But that is sort of my best answer so far, which is I go to different organisations who have some kind of ambition to be more innovative in the way they do learning, or more modern, and we can show them how to do that. And we can do it. We can do it for them, or we can show them how to do it, or we can talk about it, whichever they prefer.
Okay. So you say, people who are doing things differently, who are kind of challenging the norm and maybe zigging when the world's zagging, whatever you want to call it. Who for you are these people who are doing things differently?
Well, I thought you were doing things differently. I still do. I think you're ahead of the curve in terms of what you do. I thought the WhatsApp stuff was really interesting. And I remember a tweet where I put something about, we were recommending Slack as a platform, and you pointed out, people don't have Slack on their phones. And I thought, you're right. It's kind of that sort of thinking creeps in quite easily. It's like you put this new thing put this new learning thing on your phone. You're like, what? I've got all the learning tools I need right here. Thank you very much. And so WhatsApp we've used very successfully with some, actually with both the Red Cross and the United Nations, actually, to set up groups of people who can learn from each other, because everybody's got it on their phone. And so I thought that was good. Kenny, who I'm working with at the moment, he's doing some really, really different things with experience design, things that were mind-blowingly different. The latest thing we're working on is an alien in a box. And you've somehow got to get the alien out of the box and communicate with it. And that, I think, and Kenny's really helped me he's been quite inspirational in terms of kind of pushing that thinking along. So at the BBC, a lot of the inspiration came from people who are doing things differently in a technology sense, not in a narrow kind of learning sense. Actually, within learning, I think there's a lot of consensus and convention, because that really is all that holds learning together, is the consensus and convention. But sitting next to people who are doing really interesting creative things around the way they're using media or storytelling, that I found inspirational.
Okay.
So
yeah, I was speaking to Kenny a couple of weeks ago, and we was talking back and forth, and the stuff what he's doing kind of reminded me of something what me and my mentor right at the very start when I started my career in L&D. We worked for a large telecoms company, and it was based around these top 10 processes, which was top 10 car drivers, which was the top 10 people were struggling on. And it was a case of, right, well, how do we make this? So what we ended up doing was we ended up turning 2 training rooms into complete breakout areas. So when I say breakout, the room where you got to break out the room within a certain time.
Yeah.
So we turned the whole 2 training rooms into kind of breakout rooms, and the only way you could break out this room was to crack the code, to work out these puzzles and riddles and stuff like this, and they had to and each one had a domino effect onto the other, and it was and you had to rely on your other team to help you to do this, because it was based around a kind of a whole, like, see one, do one, teach one kind of thing. So you have to work with your team as well. So yeah, it was and just recall, if you want to just use a basic recall, being able to recall the process and how, not necessarily every single step within that process, because most of it was fluff. It was just how to get the job done. But yeah, it was the stuff what Kenny's working on sounds really interesting for sure.
It's funny when we do work like that. I think there's this kind of anxiety on the part of organisations. They'll be like, "Well, why would we pay for that? Because they're not really learning anything." And you almost have to stop them and say, "Well, 2 things. Firstly, when you send them on these courses where they sit through and they look at all the PowerPoint slides, they are not learning anything. they come away and they might remember 2 or 3 things, and those things are gone, within a matter of weeks. So that's just the illusion that they're learning something. And then secondly, do you know why they're really going on the training courses that you currently provide? Look at the feedback forms. They go for the networking. What they really go for is the experience. They go because it's an experience. And yet you're pushing people in a room and showing them PowerPoint slides, and you're calling that learning. If they're going there for the experience, why not have a think about that? Why not create a good experience that actually shifts the way their level of engagement or their capability to do something, or whatever it is? Why not just think about the design of that as an experience? And it is really twisted, I think, as I say, because people have this transactional idea of L&D at the core, which is that somehow here's a list of things people need to know, just give it to you, you're going to put it in a course, everyone's going to know it, job done, ROI, all that. Then that will be corrupting whatever the technology is. So that's why I say you have to keep digging away until you can kind of push that out.
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing which we kind of pointed out straight away was fundamentally these people were coming to the training because, one, they wanted offline time. They wanted offline time from the work, whatever it is they're doing. A lot of time they wanted offline time. And then 2, I think for me the other question is, well, why have you got me in here? Because the stuff what you are doing right now isn't working. This is the main reason why you've got someone like me in to kind of tell you how to do it differently. So, I can give you these ideas. I can create these experiences. Unfortunately, you can't make people learn. You can't make them do that. But what you can give them is you can give them an experience where that happens organically within wherever it needs to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, off a tangent. Main partial. So I guess I think we've kind of already touched upon this in a way, but I guess let's go over it again. What is the love-hate what you do within your industry now? What is a thing that you love to hate? And maybe hate's a strong word, but let's do it a different way. What are your 3 main frustrations right now?
Interesting. I think there is just one really, and the other variations of it, which is convention. And I think that the biggest challenge in my job is conventional processes, conventional ways of thinking. And that, I think, is because by and large, there are different kinds of people in the world. And it probably took me a long time to realize that, because everybody assumes that other people are just like them. And I was somebody who, I took philosophy and psychology. I wanted to think about things. I wanted to understand things. And I assumed that everybody else did. And they don't. And they're not really interested when you try and explain things either. They just operate on conventions, which sounds slightly sort of patronizing and dismissive, but they have different priorities. Getting on with people it's not my number one priority. And that's a strength and a weakness. But for many people, the convention is just, how you don't rock the boat. And so conventions exist in so many different ways in people's minds, in organizational process, in communities. And it's a tremendous barrier to progress. But those conventions also kind of hold people together. So for me, I think that's the big challenge, is overturning challenging conventions.
Okay. So there's a football stadium, and all the football stadium is absolutely full. And you've managed to buy 2 big billboards. Let's call it 1 big billboard, actually. And everyone who's coming out of this stadium is going to see this billboard. What message would you put on that billboard?
These are some of the best questions I have ever heard. At some point, I might ask for a list of these questions. I'm not being evasive. It's just, that's great. I mean, I think so. What's the go-to move? Well, I quite like that. I quite like the Nietzsche kind of. Nothing too deep. That a day when you don't dance is a day wasted, and I've sort of begun to realise, I think, what he really meant by that, which is, I mean, it may actually be literal physical dancing, although probably my daughter wouldn't want to be there when I'm doing it. But more, it's about, you have to dance in a sense in the way that you treat life. You have to dance through life. You just won't make progress if you don't dance. And by that, I mean, treat things with that kind of spirit and that kind of levity. And so I put it on a billboard because it's not it's not one of those things that people wouldn't understand because it's a deeply philosophical quote, like thoughts are the shadows of our emotions, which is the thing I like. But it would be something that appeals to everybody. It's just, just go out and dance, and it appeals at different levels. Dance intellectually, dance physically, but whatever you do, keep that feeling about you.
Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Well, I really want to know, what would you put, since you asked me that question, what would you put up on the board?
Probably for every minute you are angry, you lose 60 seconds of happiness. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, are you angry a lot?
No. So the reason why that quote was because when I very first started out in my L&D career, I used to put quotes on the door when people would walk in, and it was just a little social experiment for me to see how many people would notice the quote change daily. And it was always just the one which kind of struck home to me. There's like two ones, but that was the one which kind of always kind of helped me. And then I always timed it right for when they had to do some sort of learning, or we had to put in, because of our business needs, like a hot phone challenge when we was working with a customer service team centre. So we had to create that experience of a hot phone challenge, speaking to advisor, real life simulation. And sometimes people come back frustrated and angry because they let something slip or something happened. And it was always me using it as a reference point to kind of say, look, you're angry, just relax. Just relax. You've been put in a situation which is stressful, but think about what you just learned coming back from it. So it was just always a good anchor point more than anything. But yeah.
It's funny that I spend quite a bit of time in taxis, and you'd think that a taxi driver, basically you have to be a really chilled person because you spend your whole day sitting in various traffic. I mean, I was in Istanbul, I think week before last, and the traffic there is just insane, and people drive like the dodgems at the fairground. And you'd think that people would just be really chilled, but they're not. They're all wound up and angry. And I thought, blimey, imagine spending your whole life practically being this frustrated and wound up and angry at everything. And you're right. I mean, I do get angry about things, but I sort of have to stop myself and remind myself that it hurts me than more than it hurts anyone else.
And this is it. And I guess, for me personally, what for that minute you're angry, and then the emotions take over, the damage what you could do, the words what you said, or whatever, sometimes they can never be kind of unsaid. So I just think, just don't be in that situation. Just try, acknowledge the fact that you're angry, you're frustrated, acknowledge it, but don't let it kind of shape you and shape what comes next.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Let's change gears a little bit. So, if Mickey is a mouse and Donald is a duck, what's Pluto? Let's do it. If Mickey is a mouse, Donald is a duck, what's Goofy? Let's do Goofy.
Goofy? Well, isn't Goofy... This is one of these trick questions, isn't it? Because I thought Goofy was a dog, and I also think Pluto is a dog, in which case Goofy has a dog as a dog, which is just weird. So I think it's dogs all the way.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. So, I mean, for me, I think Pluto's a dog. Goofy wears a hat and drives a car. So I'm not really... And isn't Pluto Mickey's dog? It's been a while since I've watched cartoons. I'll let the audience decide which one that one is.
Yeah, I think, but that's it, isn't it? Is the paradox. I like it really a lot, because you're saying, can a dog be a dog's dog? And that, that's quite a philosophical question, really. And, maybe, Pluto is a dog because he defines himself as a dog. And I know you wanted to change gears, and I'm ruining that for you, but that turns out to be a tough question for me.
Maybe it just highlights a hierarchy. Maybe that's what it is. It just highlights hierarchy of modern life.
Yeah, terrifying. We did some video interviews with leaders, and one of the things that I do at the beginning of these interviews is try and tell a really bad dad joke, because it puts people in a different frame of mind, they loosen up and all this kind of stuff. But we were interviewing it was a lady, she's a French lady, so we kicked off the interview and she was looking quite nervous, and I said, "What's orange and sounds like a parrot?" Huh. She looked really anxious. I said, I, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? What's orange? It sounds like a parrot. She said, she looked really crestfallen and said, I don't know. And I said, a carrot. She just, and the look on her face, she just nodded like, oh, I screwed that up at the first question. I thought that's just terrible. It's not everybody. It's terrible when people's sense of humour kind of, leaves them as they get more and more into these organisations. I think I see that a lot.
Yes, so much. And then I think it's only once you get them out of the business environment and you get them in a social environment that they let that mask slip off and you get to actually see the true person, which is such a shame because realistically the true person who doesn't has this mask on is actually probably way more authentic, and people kind of can rally behind that person.
Yeah, but I've had that experience, and the true person is kind of like a shriveled raisin of a person, because they've spent so much time, living the mask, that their authentic self has just kind of withered away and died, out of the light. We work with it's actually a company called Rada for Business, and they do a lot of work with organisations, going and helping their leaders to be able to express themselves. And I was talking to one of the guys there, one of the trainers who does this kind of work, and he was saying it's a bit demoralising sometimes, because sometimes you realise with a leader that they've spent so long being this kind of grey kind of fabrication of a person, that in that RADA session that they do, their repertoire is now so limited, so stunted, that there's almost nothing you can do with them. And I thought, wow, that's kind of sad reflection on what our jobs sometimes do.
Just a bit. Okay, so if I was to say to you, right, Nick, you can relive 2 hours of your day. Let's do 2 hours of your working day, just to make it a little bit tougher. And that can be anything from end-to-end design, conversations, whatever you want to call it. What 2 hours would you love to do?
There are two kinds of things I like. I really like writing. So rather boring introvert response. I quite like it when I'm sort of in the flow, I'm writing something. And I also like when I'm with colleagues out of the office and we're having a conversation which is about work but isn't about work, if you know what I mean. So we're talking about something that we both kind of care about. And typically that's learning, because I only really hire people who care about learning. And so talking about something we're passionate about, maybe over coffee and prep or something. And those, that I really enjoy as well.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot to change in the environment in general. I think I was having a conversation yesterday with someone. It was a teacher actually. I was like, look, here's for me the fundamental issue with the school. I said, you have two teachers who are both equally qualified. One of them follows the syllabus to the letter. They get the teachers in, they get the kids in, sit them in the usual teacher layout, and you have the teacher at the front. And let's just use the subject of geography. But then you have the other teacher who will take them out and they'll take them to the woods and they'll show them what conker trees are and they'll show them these leaves and whatever. And if both them classes fail, the person who took them out into the woods would be the one for the sack, not the one who wasn't. I just think that's really scary. I went off on a tangent, and just because of changing environment. But yeah, I think, you see that quite a lot, just changing environment, going for a coffee and stuff like that. You can kind of melt away a lot of the, a lot of the kind of anticipation of what you would get normally within a business conversation. You having a conversation within an office and then having a conversation in a coffee shop.
Yeah. It's funny that I don't know quite why that is, but it's worth perhaps exploring a bit more, because imagine that you were going to go in the Lake District with a group of people that you quite liked, and you're going to spend 8 hours kind of walking through the hills, having different conversations, with them. How is that fundamentally different from a day where you go to an office and you sit in meeting after meeting with people? I mean, there are lots of differences, but could you not do one in the style of the other? I know that some people do. I mean, Steve Jobs kind of famously would. I know Jonah Lehrer, who I've always kind of admired, as a Ron Johnson talks about, just spending a day kind of walking with him, having a conversation. But I think there's something about the way that we formalize things, go to this room, sit in this meeting, here's an agenda, that somehow kills people's engagement and enthusiasm for having what is basically the same kind of conversation. So yeah, I think a change of place, and Google do that quite well. I've been, as a number of us have their offices, and they create lots of different spaces that you can kind of move around and have different kinds of conversation. So it is important. I'm not quite sure why.
I think maybe it's because of when we get told to go and have a meeting in within an office room or whatever, we bring our past experience in. You know, I think maybe it literally is just a simple change. It's just the second step, because I think when I go into a meeting, I know, right, exactly, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to be, and usually that's because of reflections and experiences what I've had beforehand, and I'm like, this is going to be another hour of my time which I'm never going to get back. But
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's really funny this, because I saw this thing from Elon Musk. I hate sort of celebrity quotes generally, but you can't miss it sometimes. And he said, if you're in a meeting and it's not good use of your time, just get out and walk out. Get up and walk out. And I thought quite a lot about this, because I thought, well, yeah, I mean, you're Elon Musk, you can do that. And everyone feels horrified that they haven't made good use of your time. But I can't see myself doing it. I mean, I'm a fairly rebellious sort of person, but I just cannot imagine myself getting 20 minutes into a meeting and thinking, you know what, I'm bored of this, I'm just going to walk out. I mean, the reputational fallout would be extraordinary. And that sort of stuck in my mind is, why can't we do that? Because if you were going to a party, let's say, and you're getting a bit bored of talking to somebody, or you'd come to the end of a conversation that was quite interesting, you'd just be like, yeah, okay, well, thanks very much, that's great, and you'd move on. But somehow the meeting format absolutely prohibits that kind of normal behaviour. And yeah, I mean, that it struck me that you just can't do that. You can't just say, look, it's 18 minutes in. I think I can't contribute any more to this meeting. I'm off. Maybe you do. Maybe you do it, Danny. You kind of coach me on how to do it, but I can't.
I just think when I was at university, I did forensic science. I did CSI, and that was one of the true things where I learned what the power of an experience. So they bought 3 houses and they turned them into true crime scenes, because the people who the lecturers have all been served time as in like criminal scene investigations and stuff, and it was true to life. But they taught me something which was really interesting. When A makes contacts with B, a bit of A rubs off on B and a bit of B rubs off on A. I've used it in the car, when 2 cars bump into each other for paintwork.
Yeah.
I just think you should be able to do that in a meeting. Okay, I've come to a meeting. This is my information which I'm going to give you. This is my input. Thanks for giving me that. There's no, just get to the point and exchange information what you need to be able to kind of move forward. There's no need for you to be in there for another 45 minutes to hear something else. Yeah, so it's interesting.
Yeah.
So let's get to know Nick a little bit more. What's one unusual habit you have that nobody knows about?
Wow. Unusual habits. Sure, I've got quite a few. I'm just trying to think now. There are bad habits I've got that I sort of like. I bite my nails a bit, but everybody knows about that because people see me doing it. Unusual habits. Oh, I collect skulls. Not everybody knows about that. I've got a little collection of skulls. I built a Victorian study, sort of Sherlock Holmes style, at home with lots of skulls and curiosities and things like that. I don't know why I'm kind of drawn to that era of time. It's a bit. I don't know, some fascination with that. So yeah, I've got a collection of. You're not allowed to have real human skulls, but I have lots of replicas and other kinds of skulls. So
okay.
There's one.
Interesting. So, if I was to say to you, Nick, right, the 80-year-old Nick in the future is going to give you some information, and it's going to give you some advice. What's one bit of advice 80-year-old Nick would give to you, what you're still struggling to take right now?
Interesting. I'm rather afraid I know what 80-year-old Nick would say, and it would be to take more risks. And I think it's being slightly afraid, although I might sound, quite maverick in some respects, and I am, I guess. There are other kinds of risks, sort of big financial risks that I don't take. Those are just kind of going off and setting up my own business, for example. Yeah. Which I might eventually be forced to do, but I don't know. I've no interest in kind of the commercial side of life, so there's some sorts of risks I just steer clear of.
Okay.
I think that might be it.
Okay, superb. So, What's the one thing when you get overwhelmed or kind of overwhelmed, yeah, and kind of you lack focus in what you're doing or anything like that? What's the one thing you do where kind of regains your focus and kind of composure? Is there anything, any like tips or tricks what you do?
Exercise. I mean, it's a dull one, but I do struggle to retain my composure sometimes because I'm bounced all around the world and, weird times of the day in some strange country, talking to people from a very different background. And I find the only thing that reliably enables me to kind of reset is just finding the nearest kind of gym. So exercise does that. I can use it to kind of reset myself mentally and physically, I think.
Okay. Any type of exercise in particular? So, like, are we talking CrossFit? Are we talking, dead, bench? Or are we talking something more like gymnastic and body movement? What's your go-to?
So it's either kind of free weights or running.
Okay.
So either, yeah.
Okay, superb. So I know we hit over the hour mark here, so I've got a couple more questions and then I think we're done.
Yeah. Good.
What's the one idea you have seen and you thought, sweet Jesus, I wish I came up with that one? And let's define it. Let's refine it. Sorry, so that it's not something like Google. Let's say within our industry.
Well, I was thinking of something, but it's only tangentially related to the industry. Within the industry, I think. Oh, that's a good one. Okay, so I've got a couple. So Duolingo is basically a realization of some of the things that I'm currently writing about in this book that I'm trying to put together, which is a blurring of work and learning. So I don't know, you probably know a fair bit about Duolingo, but basically there's a point at which you're learning, and as you may not realize it, as you start to get better, you're actually doing real work, you're doing real translation work. And that is ultimately, I think, the model that I'm writing about and talking about now, which is how do you actually blend learning and work in a way which is kind of seamless. So Duolingo does that. But the other thing is, I mean, I remember when I was at Siemens Communications, we used to go to schools and talk about the future. No, actually, I don't think that was my brief. I think we ran an award scheme, and I used to have to get up on stage and talk about things. And I chose to talk about the future. And I remember, and this would have been, 25 years ago, talking about a world in which we didn't need signs on the sides of the road because everybody had a headset, which kind of superimposed what you needed to know. Augmented reality, basically. And so I'm certainly not the first person to dream up augmented reality and talk about it. But, that was the thing that I could see being world changing probably 25 years ago. And I still think we'll kind of change the world in probably about the next 10 years' time.
Okay. Interesting. I was reading, I think it might have been a podcast actually, probably about 4 months ago around Duolingo. And I might be getting confused because it was a while ago. But I didn't know the person who created Duolingo created the captures on Google. Did you know this?
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
So I'm sure, I might be getting a bit mixed up here. So basically, captures was, the person who created the captures kind of, it was obviously to prove that you weren't a robot and stuff like that. And then when Google kind of bought captures and recaptures, what we did is one of Google's missions was to make all books online. So all the translate. So what happens is they used AI to kind of transcript all these books, but there's certain words which can't be transcripted by Google's AI. So what we do is they use them now in capture and recapture for the human eye. So that's why you say, what does this text say, or which on this image, which one has cars in? It's based on Google not being able to kind of transcript where.
Yeah. That's. I was aware of that. Here's another example. Imagine you create a game for kids to learn to be drone pilots, and at some point they don't realise it. They're actually doing real package delivery for Amazon.
Wow.
So you could scale it in lots of interesting and different ways. So that's that I think that's the way forward.
Interesting. That's something that what I'd love to just talk about on its own for another hour. So what kind of, so I put a tweet out onto Twitter and onto LinkedIn. I was like, any questions you want me to ask? And someone come back to me with quite a good question. And we've probably touched upon it already, but let's just jump on it anyway. What's the strangest hurdle in learning development that you have had to tackle, and how did you do it?
The strangest hurdle. Well, I think I've had to tackle lots of strange hurdles, but strange in different senses. But I like if we just take the emotional impact of kind of the word strange, and that lights up other things, some of which just seem strange to me because they're more recent. I think the bit of work that Kenny did really recently was a strange in a way, and it was because an organization was tremendously hierarchical. And when I say hierarchical, this organization is so hierarchical that if a senior person goes along to a meeting and there's a relatively junior person in the meeting, so more than a couple of levels down, they will just leave the meeting. They just won't sit in a meeting with junior people.
Wow.
And one of our challenges, so that is a bit extreme, isn't it? And one of our challenges was, how do you get an organization like that to be more playful and less hierarchical, and break down some of those barriers and kind of change the culture? And the second thing then that was strange about it is the way that we tackled it. And it was Kenny's idea. He came up with this idea for a ball pit. And we'd seen something similar online. So, like many ideas, it's the application of one thing to another context. So we and it felt really risky at times. We said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to put this massive ball pit, in reception one day in their head office. And we're going to write on the balls different questions, like, what's on your bucket list? A bit like your questions, Danny. What would you put on a billboard, or what was your childhood dream? And we're going to write these on the balls in the ball pit. And as people come into the building, we're going to get them to sit in the ball pit like kids and pick up these and have these conversations about each other. And I was really worried, actually. I realised that maybe I'm a bit conventional. I was really worried that it just was going to be an absolute disaster. But partly, I think, through Kenny's efforts, it was an enormous success, so much so that people started talking about making it a permanent fixture. And there's a video of it, and you can really see the excitement and delight and the way that different conversations are had in that kind of context. So back to your point, Danny, really by shifting that context in that way, by putting people in a kind of a strange situation and by directing them in new ways to interact with each other, had kind of quite magical effects. And that was quite an odd one.
Okay, superb. So I think I know the answer to this question, but let's just try anyway. So what is something that you are learning right now? Is it a new hobby, a new skill? I don't know. Take it into whatever context you want to take it into. But yeah, what is it a new something? What's something you're learning right now?
Probably in a few different directions. I've doing a bit of baking with my daughter. So I cook things and they go badly wrong. So I think we tried chocolate brownies 3 times. And the first time it was like a sludge. It was actually quite tasty sludge, but it was sludge. It never congealed into something solid. And then the second time I thought, well, I'll get it. I'll cook it a bit longer, and it was horrible. It was really dry. And so the third time round, I got it about right. So that was that. Gardening. Basically, my approach to gardening is just keep buying plants until some of them survive. And so I think I'm learning, but very slowly, badly. And then I'm reading a handful of different books at the moment. Damasio, neuroscientist on learning. I've gone back and dug out something from Bartlett. I've got it here. Mary Helen Imordino Yang, Emotions, Learning and the Brain, and something on Bartlett's Psychology and Reconstruction by Brady Wagner. So I'm learning a little bit about those things. Was that the answer that you thought I was going to give, Danny, or was it something?
No, it's actually quite interesting. So I thought, obviously you've got to be careful because it's your idea, but I thought you was going to mention about kind of a whole process of the book, something that you're working on right now and kind of working your way through the journey of how you write your book and kind of stuff like that. But that's interesting.
I just sort of feel like people who talk about the book they're writing are annoying. I mean, just publish it for God's sake. It's kind of like until I just want to shut up about it until it's done, and then probably what will happen is I'll publish it and nobody will read it or buy it, but then it'll be like job done, fine. So, but I do know some people who it's become like a central theme for them about the book they're writing.
Right.
I'm writing a novel. You meet them, I'm writing a novel, and I just think that's. I don't know, something about that. I'm not quite sure what it is. It's just annoying. So I'm going to try not to talk too much about it at the moment. I don't think I'm really learning about writing a book. I'm just ploughing through it, and I'm going to write it, send it off, and hopefully it'll be a success.
That's good. Could you just make a promise right now so it's live, so that it's on record? Don't turn into one of these people who write a book and then reference it every single time I talk. So it was interesting. A couple of months ago, I went to an event and I was like, it's really interesting. The board of people you've got up there, every single one of them are pretty much writing a book. I'm like, just because you're writing a book, it doesn't mean.
But you know what, Danny? This is the annoying thing, right? This is partly why I'm doing it, and it is going to turn me into one of these horrible people because I've been writing blogging, as many people know, for years. Since I was back at the BBC, before blogs were like a thing, like probably so now, I don't know, it might be 15 years or something, loads of blogs. And I go along and talk at events and people say, oh, that's really interesting. And they would say, have you written a book? And I would say, no, but everything I write is free. And you'd see the look of disappointment in their eyes. And it eventually twigged. This is what I meant at the beginning. It's about marketing. Progress is only about 1% discovery. It's no good if you've discovered something earth-shaking. You have to hand it to Seth Godin or some of the others who actually then cycles it up into a big, or Dan Pink into some big marketing extravaganza before anybody will take you seriously. And what I hate about that, in a sense, is that we can't take things at face value. We can't think for ourselves. We have to be prescribed this advice from an authority, where the authority is the publishing house. And of course, the problem with the publishing house is the publishing house tends to publish things which are going to be popular, which almost by definition are going to be conventional, not necessarily innovative. So, I mean, there's something which kind of troubles me about that, which is we only want to listen to people, once they've written a book. But finally, after 15 years of writing blogs and getting up on stage, I kind of feel like I have to. So it's a bit of a concession.
Okay.
So yeah, are you going to write something? You think?
No. I would love to. I just would not know where to start. See, the issue what I have really, Nick, is I'm not very good with words. I have ideas and I can say this is how it would work and this is what how to get from here to here. And I'd like to challenge again. It's not disruptive. I think sometimes it is literally just being a little bit provocative, and just asking the question, why? Why can't you do what you're doing now, which is going to take you a year? Why can't you achieve that in 6 months? I just think, why can we not use this to do that? Maybe I'll create a colouring book. Maybe that's what I'll do. So yeah, I'm all about kind of visual more than anything. Dyslexia, kind of, I call it creative writing now. But yeah, book writing, and I would want to be able to do it in my own tone of voice. Like, I think the way I talk on, say, LinkedIn and stuff like that is my tone of voice. I don't shape it up or shape it down to be anything it's not. So
that's interesting, though, isn't it? Because it's the ideas that matter, and I understand what you're saying, that there are people who have this marketing spin, and I think I've got better over the years of where spinning an idea into, turning a phrase until it catches a light. The expression I think I heard. But there are other people who get ideas across in really interesting ways. I don't know if you come across Amy Burval on Twitter, and she does. She's got a whole blog site where she does amazingly creative stuff, just mind blowing. That isn't words, but much more visual. So I'd say she's worth having a look at if you're looking for different ways to express those ideas. It's kind of next level creativity.
I think I've recently just connected with her on LinkedIn, actually. So yeah. I think I'll definitely kind of reach out to her as well. I think so. Your book, I guess, for me, I think there's something what's missing out on books nowadays. I think you buy the Kindle version or whatever version. But I just think now to buy a book, I think someone needs to start looking at the experience of a book now as well. So, the very typical books tend to be the hardback book with a bit of a print copy, a bit of a printed sleeve on the front. I think, wouldn't it be good if you had a book which was furry? Wouldn't it be really good if you sent out a book and the experience was opening up this furry book and kind of the book being the experience before you even get into reading it? Just, yeah.
There's something funny about that. I think you're right. I went along to this evening that Brada for Business organised for some of the people they work with, where they were showing a reduced Shakespeare production of, what was it, Hamlet or something. And they reduce it because they've got to perform it on the QE2. And I was sitting next to a publisher as we watched this thing. And so I can't remember how long, it was like 40 minutes or something. And the philosophical question was, I wonder how much you could reduce it and it still be kind of the same play. And I said to this guy, well, there's an easy way to answer that question, right? You send people to the play, whole audience people, and then when they come out, you ask them what they remember and get them to tell you the story. And there'll be kind of like, an average version that will emerge. And then that's your minimum reduction, right? Because if people go and see Romeo and Juliet and they only remember kind of basically 10 key things that happen, well, then that's all you have to reproduce. And this publisher said, no, that wouldn't work at all. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, when people go and see a play, they may not remember any of it, but they want to feel like they had a proper experience. It's like when people buy a book, and as a publisher, he was saying, they may not read it, but they want it to sit on the coffee table, and they want it. And I think publishing is a little bit like that. I'm not sure that the book is there because of that as an experience. I think there's a whole load more around people, what it says about people and how it makes them feel, and importance that goes with it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think you're right. It is, but it's quite a rich experience.
It's interesting. I think, there's always them books on your bookshelf where you're proud of reading them. And it's like, yes, I've read that book. And I think you put me onto Anti-Fragile. And for me, I found that a bit of a struggle to read. I kind of had to keep going back and forth to it. But once you get through, you're like, okay, I'm quite proud I got through that one. There's a book which I'm reading at the moment called The Little Big Things. Well, I've finished it now, but basically it's around a guy who went on a lad's holiday, and he jumped into the sea, kind of headbutted the sandbank, and then he remained completely paralysed from the neck down. Yeah. And it's talking about him re-experiencing life again, and kind of how the whole perception's changed on what.
I'm just typing it in. The Little Big.
Yeah, Little Big Things. I think J.K. Rowling's written the intro for it and stuff. That's a real good book. It's just a simple. It's not an intense read or anything. It's quite a simple book, but I think it just lets you look at things slightly different again. It's a really good book. So yeah. Okay, so 2 more questions and we are done, Nick. So I asked you at the beginning for some numbers. These numbers tally up to a list of random items which I've got. So the story is this: you're on a desert island, and the only items that you got are these. So you've got a cement stone, some lip gloss, a screw, and a spoon. What do you do?
Cement stone. Do you mean like like powdered cement? Yeah. Would you say work clothes?
So you got cement stone. You got lip gloss.
Lip gloss.
A screw and a spoon. What do you do with these items?
Well, the cement, I guess, quite easy. As it's a desert island, I can mix it with sand and water, and I can hopefully build some kind of shelter. So I think that would be quite important, and something that I could use to cook on. That might be even more important, because you can build something with cement that is like an oven. You can do all kinds of things with that, like bake ceramics and stuff in it. So I think that would be important. The lip gloss, I'm really not sure what I would do with that. I think it would just melt in the heat, wouldn't it?
Okay.
And then the screw and the spoon. Well, if it's just one screw, I'm not sure how much mileage I can get out of a single screw. But I don't know. I don't know. Let's say I'll screw it into a tree, and then I can hang things on it. So like if I have a jacket or some clothes. And then the spoon, I sort of feel a spoon would be important somehow. Because if you didn't have one, I think you'd have to make one, wouldn't you?
Mm.
So I think a spoon I would use for, I don't know, let's say I got coconuts. How are you going to get all the, the coconut stuff out of the coconut, the flesh or whatever? You use the spoon to scrape it out.
Great shout.
Yeah.
You didn't have easy ones there, to be honest, Nick. I've kind of asked these kind of random questions, and it looks like you've had some quite hard ones there, to be honest.
I'm not sure about the lip gloss, so that's going to keep me worried for a while.
So, right at the very beginning of the car, I asked you what is it you want, when you was in school, what is it you wanted to be, and you said zookeeper, I think. Obviously,
Yeah.
we're constantly learning, we're constantly developing, and really, we never really stop that, and we never really grow too old to be able to do anything. So if I was to ask you this question now, Nick, what do you want to be when you grow older? What would you say?
I still want to be Doctor Who.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, still working on that.
There's nothing wrong with that. So, Nick, how can people find out a little bit more about you? Where can they go?
I'm quite easy to find. Just type Nick Shacklton-Jones in on Google, and that will take you to Twitter, LinkedIn, and my blog website, which is aconventional.com. Although more recently, I switched from the primary kind of blog site being aconventional to LinkedIn, because it turned out if I write articles on LinkedIn, there's a lot more kind of traction, a lot more comments. I find the comments and the conversations really helpful and developmental, and so I'm tending to kind of favour LinkedIn at the moment.
Okay, superb. Well, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Danny. Enjoyed it. Cheers.
Bye bye.